It's The World This Week, 7 days. 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor. Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Always happy to be here.
Happy you could make it. Happy to welcome as well Laure Mondeville, senior correspondent for French broadsheet Le Figaro. How are things?
Good.
Busy week.
Very busy.
Busy week.
Always busy.
Always busy.
These days, right?
Even though summer is upon us, Vivian Walt is busy, Time magazine correspondent in Paris. How are you?
Very good.
Mm-hmm. And Georg Blume, Paris correspondent for the German paper Die Zeit. How are you?
Thank you, I'm fine.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag World This Week. You have to wonder, what is the rationale? The Trump administration had to know it would trigger fury when it decided over a recent 6-week period to separate migrants at the border from their children. Vivian Walt, this is the cover of your magazine this week. We can also show the original photo by John Moore for Getty Images. Moore, who's been covering the border crisis for years. And, you know, when I looked at that, I mean, you have to think Donald Trump must have known this kind of reaction would come.
You would think. But I think, you know, and we've been talking about this for 18 months now, what's so astonishing about Donald Trump is that he simply doesn't care. He cares about his base. And so long as his base thinks that...
doesn't care, or is he trying to stir? Is he trying to get a cover like this? I'm almost wondering here.
I don't think so. Well, you know, at this point, it's all, you know, fake media. And so whatever fake media says about him is discredited in the eyes of his supporters. I think the big question is, did he miscalculate on this one? And in fact, is there just such a revulsion to the, you know, just the sheer inhumanity of this that it could possibly be one of the rare instances in which his supporters might actually, you know, balk at what he's doing.
Laure Mondeville, a miscalculation, or is this part of the plan for Trump?
I think it's both, maybe. I think it's part of the plan because Trump is trying to show that he's going to close the border, and that he's going to do it whatever it costs. And in that sense, I would say that Trump, I was talking to this conservative thinker, Harvey Mansfield, a few days ago, and asking him about Trump. And he dislikes Trump because he's a, you know, well-bred gentleman, conservative. And he said, you know, Trump in a way is a Machiavellian type of political leader. That means that he believes that he has to act whatever the cost, and that, you know, it's not about compassion. I mean, the title of your this beginning of the show, you know, compassion versus security. It's about security. We have to secure the border. We have to solve the question. We have to stop mass migration. So we have to send the signals. At the same time, I think he miscalculated because the outrage was huge, and he had, of course, after a certain point, to sort of answer the outrage. His wife went there.
He still let it simmer
but
a little bit.
Yes, he did. And I think he did it maybe deliberately, because he probably thinks that in the end, because on the other side, the people are only about emotion and indignation about what is going on with this humanitarian, you know, aspect, and not giving any answer for the following step. He says, okay, I'm talking about the whole issue. I'm asking the Democrats to come to the table and solve this global question of security and humanitarian issues. And they're not doing it. And I think that the people who support him, and I would say maybe beyond his supporters, people think he has a point, because they think that the Democrats are not bringing any long-term, resolution to this issue. And I think it's the same in Europe, that the populists at the moment still have a huge opening, because on the other side, people are saying, okay, it's horrible, we should bring the Aquarius to our shores. But at the same time, they're not thinking through, you know, how to secure the external border of the EU. So we are trapped between, on the one side emotion, and on the other side security, and how to bring together and find a sort of a very difficult to find but sort of middle ground approach, I think, is the issue of the time.
Mr. Dickey?
I think Laura is confusing the European situation and the American situation. It's not a security issue in America. Crime is not up in America. Crime is way down in America. Way down in America. The idea that these people coming up from Central America and Mexico are making life so difficult and so dangerous for American citizens is nuts. It's all based on anecdotal evidence, on a few criminals, on a few incidents in which are exploited the way racists and bigots always support these kinds of issues. And that's what Trump is doing. That's why he was, in fact, perfectly happy to see all those little brown babies put in cages. He didn't mind. He thought it was a lesson to the brown parents. He thought it was a lesson to the Central American parents. But mainly, it's a lesson to that core base of his that is often racist and xenophobic, and that believes his propaganda about the dangers posed by all these foreigners in America. Now, if we talk about Europe, yes, I think Salvini's got a point. In Italy, it's become a dumping ground for all these Africans coming up from the South. It's not just a racist issue. It's a failure of the rest of the European Union to do anything about it, to cooperate. But that's not the issue in the United States.
Can I think
that? Trump made...
Can I just answer?
Yeah, no,
just
wait.
1 minute.
I just think Trump really made a mistake here. I think America is still a profoundly Christian country. And what these images show goes against all Christian values. And if, especially the electors of Trump in the Midwest, I mean, in rural America, they hate these images. They go to church every Sunday. They don't want to see their president being, killing children or taking away children from their parents. It goes against all, fundamental family thinking in America. Maybe. I mean, there is something, you might say Trump is not, I still believe there's another America who has Christian and family values.
I believe you're right on that point. I think that nobody in America is happy with his images, and that's why he was forced to sort of change his policies. But what I was trying to say is it's not a question of security. In America, it is true. You're right, Christopher, that it's not a question of security in the narrow sense of the word. I think it's more for the Americans who are voting Trump. It's more about we have borders, we have laws. We need to organize. We have to control. We have to be able, as a government and as a state, to control immigration. And you have a huge amount of Americans who believe that. And I remember going on the border in 2014 when Obama had about the same situation with tens of thousands of children alone crossing the border because they were sent by their parents to sort of be in the U.S. and then they could have some kind of reunification of the families. And so they were coming alone, by the way, and they were welcome in Christian churches where I was. It was very dramatic. They were coming in, they were lost. It was very difficult. But nobody knew how to handle the question. And at the time, there was a lot of criticism of Obama. And I remember being in McAllen, precisely the place where these things are happening now, and going in the country just behind where you have thousands and thousands of people crossing every day. And you have, for instance, a police station, which is totally overwhelmed. They are in the bush, in the Texan bush, and they are looking after this territory, and they don't know what to do. And you have actually Hispanic families living there, thousands of them for a long time.
There's nothing new about this.
And they're worried too.
We were doing these stories on the border 20 years ago. There's really nothing new.
I actually started doing these stories 40 years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not something of this century or.
But it's coming to a head now again.
I mean, when you have 20,000, when the Pentagon is going to have to build 20,000, shelters, because they're expecting 20,000 of kids coming alone. It's huge.
Plus 20,000 is
That's
a
not
drop
the
in the
20,000.
bucket.
First of all, the 20,000 is not for 20,000 kids coming alone. The problem is 20,000 shelters for now families that are being incarcerated with their children. That's the problem.
That's true. Also,
I mean, I think that it's important to remember that there was never like an enormous surplus of compassion towards people crossing the border. It's not like we're suddenly hitting this crisis where things are sinister and terrible, which It's a dark time, but I mean, it was always like that. There was always hostility on that border, and
There are always issues. There are always people going back and forth and not going back and forth.
I'm very grateful you're reminding us that that is not only a migration problem and that it has always existed. And I think if you're telling numbers like thousands and thousands, you are creating this kind of atmosphere again that we are, being invaded and so forth. It's the same for Europe right now, that we have less migrants than in the years before.
That is the same for
we have
Europe.
much less migrants in Italy.
I think Europe is a different.
disagree.
But we have much less immigrants also in Europe this year than before.
United
And the
States-
political crisis is still there, of course, and we have to deal with it. But it's not, about telling in the media that thousands and thousands and thousands are arriving. That is the propaganda of the populists.
It's not propaganda. It's the reality. And I think that saying that not naming things by their name is actually the beginning of populism.
Well, let's name things
Because
by their
then-
name.
then
The crime of crossing the border is a misdemeanor. That's a misdemeanor. It's a minor crime. It's not a felony. It's not a terrible crime. But for this misdemeanor, you put children and their parents in jail, and you separate 2,300 or 2,500 children from their parents, and you don't know how to get them back.
I'm not defending. I'm not absolutely. Let's be clear, Christopher.
The reason
I'm not
he said
defending the fact that they are separating families.
Laura, this is all part and parcel of the idea we have to have security on our border, and he's going to use it. He did think he could use this to blackmail Congress and create a situation where he could say it's all the fault of the Democrats. They're the ones who did this. That's why he changed his mind, 14 times, something like that. The administration changed its story about what it would do with these children. It was an absolutely cynical maneuver. And he was cynically destroying the lives of 2,300 little kids. For what?
And let's not forget the hundreds of children that they've lost track of. That they
that's what
put
I'm saying, yes.
Yes,
with
unbelievable.
families.
Before we talk about the Europe side of this, because it's very important and it's going to keep coming to a head over the next couple of days, two questions regarding what's going on in the United States. First of all, on Wednesday, when the fury against Donald Trump was at its highest, he goes off to Minnesota for a jam-packed campaign rally or fundraiser, whatever you want to call it, where he packed
A love me rally. That's
well,
what he is.
my question to you, Christopher, is does he know something that we don't? Back in 2016, while Hillary Clinton was doing polling, he was doing data mining. Is this issue, despite all appearances, a winner for Donald Trump?
Well, it's a winner if he can keep mobilizing his base by basically building his campaign around fear and loathing. That's really what he exploits, like almost any demagogue. It's all about fear. You're being invaded. They're going to change your lives. They're stealing your jobs. Crime is terrible. MS-13, the Salvadoran gangs are taking over our country, all of which is absolute crap. But if you keep pushing that line, as lots of propagandists have known, in Germany in the 30s, for instance, lots of people have known that if you push that line hard enough, people will say, my God, I really am afraid. And you're the man who can save us. You're the leader who can save us.
All right, and I have to ask about Melania Trump and this visit to McAllen, Texas, and that detention center with that green sort of military-style jacket with the message, I really don't care, do you, on the back. Is this part of the script, Vivian Walt?
It's kind of, it leaves me a little speechless. As if like she didn't know that there was an important message on the back of her jacket. She's a professional model, for heaven's sake. It very much like her wearing stilettos, if you recall, when visiting the areas hit by Hurricane Harvey. She simply is kind of tone deaf. This is never a job she wanted. It's, the state of her marriage has always been a big open question. And it's really incredible, I think.
My favorite explanation is that it's a message to her husband.
No, I think
I don't think it's
it's
true,
the American government who doesn't control their own messages anymore. I mean, that the protocol should know what kind of jacket she is wearing. No, I mean it's.
Well, she has an absolutely incredibly bad staff. You cannot imagine that they would let her make the kinds of errors that she makes. But either someone is plotting against her, or they're just completely incompetent.
Frankly, I think that somehow, it was calculated. I don't believe that it's just, she put on the vest. I think that Trump, when he said she's sending a message that to the people who think that we don't care about kids, that's what he more or less explained.
I couldn't figure out what he was saying in
I
that
know,
tweet.
but what I am telling you is I find the whole thing ridiculous, but I think it's very also, symbolic of our time, where everything is actually about images, about what she was wearing. It's the whole. It's like a ping pong of distractions, of sort of ridiculous signs that no one can read to the
I agree,
end.
but it's also one of the things it distracts from is that she didn't go visit the kids who were taken away from their parents. She visited kids who had come, older kids, teenagers basically, who had come across the border, like the ones you were talking about earlier on. So she goes down there to send a message about children being ripped away from their parents. We're talking about toddlers. We're talking about children as young as 8 or 9 months being taken from their parents, but she doesn't see them. So the whole.
Are you sure? Because she said, "What can I do to reunite them?"
Of course, that's what she said.
Oh my gosh!
It was a bogus trip from the beginning. Maybe that's what she was commenting on.
I don't know.
On this side of the Atlantic, it was the week that Hungary's parliament voted to outlaw helping refugees with up to 1-year sentences for offenders. Its leader, Viktor Orban, taking part in a regional summit where, along with the leaders of Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, the Visegrad Group announced the boycott of an informal weekend EU summit on refugees. And also present at that meeting, the new Austrian chancellor, who, guess what, Georg Blume, takes over as rotating president of the European Union come July 1st.
Yes, I think we already see the Austrian Prime Minister visit the American ambassador in Berlin, and the probable eventual challenger of Merkel, our chancellor, in the CDU, and they together seem to form a new right-wing government for, Europe. It's a very uncomforting situation, these new right-wing alliances taking,
Now, Sebastian Kurz himself,
yes,
he's not from the far right. He's from the Christian Democrats.
Yes.
So this is same heritage as that party of Angela Merkel.
It's like our Bavarian party, which is a traditional conservative party, but who is, as you know now, challenging overtly Merkel's power in Berlin, and with right-wing suggestions. They want to close the Bavarian border. They want to disobey orders from Berlin. It is, something which we haven't had in Germany for a long time, such a rift in the within the traditional politics. All, of course, under the pressure of the new right-wing party AfD.
All of which is fed by the immigration issue.
Of course, yes.
I think that.
Sorry,
I think that what is happening today is really, the sign that something extremely important is. There is a huge shift in European politics, and if we keep our head in the ground and just see this in terms of indignation and emotion, and it's about leprosa, as the president said. Leprosy. Sorry.
The French president on Thursday on a trip to Britain.
Exactly, rising on the scenes. If I can finish, and I think it's dangerous to be only about that, because if we don't see the fact that there are real issues now in Europe with immigration, we are going to get the extremists, not only the populists or the Bavarian conservatives.
I have to say, I think that Chris hit on something very important, and that is the issue of racism and xenophobia. it's not just that we've had an enormous migrant crisis over the last few years. It's also the changing complexion and ethnicity of Europe, and the fact that you have enormous cities in Europe that are extremely diverse in a way that they have never been before.
So multiculturalism come to Europe and it frightens people.
Absolutely. And I think the migrant crisis sort of was, right at that time where, you have that kind of an enormous new generation of Europeans of color. And I think that the old guard is extremely threatened in several parts of Europe.
It's not only the old
It's time
guards.
to remind you that we in Germany have taken in 1 million refugees 2 years ago, and still what Trump said this week that crime is going up in Germany is a lie. It's not. We have 1 million refugees,
going down.
taken them. They live with us, and crime is not going up. Crime is, as the German government responded, is down, and we have to keep also telling the good story.
But when you say that, those who support, for instance, the AfD say, "Oh yeah, but the statistics are lying."
Well, of course they say that. There are no true facts anymore because that's the whole game with populism. I mean,
Alternative facts.
there are alternative facts. There was actually a great piece about Hannah Arendt, the great German philosopher, who was talking about how you destroy a society by essentially eliminating its faith in facts. There are no facts. There are only alternative facts. My opinions are my facts. That's it.
But I think that, again, it's not only about security. You're talking about security, but it's also about cultural insecurity. That's what you were saying, that actually the people are asking for the right to protect their cultures, and they feel threatened by a mass immigration, which is changing the face of our societies, and they are asking for the right to some historical continuity. There is the problem of Islam. They don't know to what extent Islam is going to be compatible with our societies. There is the problem of women's rights. There are many issues every day, and I remember being in Germany recently. I was in Dresden, and I was talking to a guy who is called the Saint of the Immigrants in Dresden. He's a wonderful guy who was a local administrator, and he retired recently, and he took over the question of migrants in Dresden, and he worked with them since 2015, and he did a lot to integrate them. He's created these wonderful cafes in Dresden where people can come and talk to these migrants, help them to integrate, help some families, etc. But he talked to me for 2 hours, and he was telling me, even myself, I questioned the idea in terms of numbers of how integration is a difficult thing.
My mother-in-law, was a very conservative woman. She's always voted for CDU, and she doesn't like Merkel because she is too left-wing, and still she is looking for the Syrian refugee in her village now, and and getting food and clothing for their children, and life has not become worse because of mass immigration. When you tell.
If I may,
use these words. You're using this. This populist language. Really, unbelievable. This kind of.
I think I agree with Laura. I agree with Laura.
And if you take an example like from Dresden, you have to take the good examples too.
If I may,
in France, there was the other day in Place de la République, we had 1 day celebrations for the refugees. Even in France, you can still celebrate the refugees and take up their voice. We are not, a minority fighting the migration populace. We are still a majority who wants to deal with these issues positively.
I think
we are,
if I may,
we are in defensive talk matter.
If I may,
exhilarating. Or how do you say?
I think. Look, I think first of all, I think we have to, especially Americans watching this show, need to understand that Europe is not a nation of immigrants. It's a completely different construct. And people who wanted to get out of the societies, the nationalism, what they had, they went to America. They didn't stay here. The ones who stayed here want their European civilization, and they feel it threatened by this massive influx of immigrants. That's a very different dynamic than you have in the United States, which was entirely built by immigrants. That's the first thing you need to understand, and that has to be dealt with here in Europe. But the second thing you need to understand is that the real danger of immigrants is not the immigrants themselves. They make society safer. They live in places, build societies, build families that are not done elsewhere. You see, that's why New York, 40% of the population of New York City, and I wrote a book called Securing New York, about securing New York City, 40% was not born in the United States of America. And it's one of the safest cities in the world. So if the problem were immigration, it would be incredibly dangerous. The problem is the children of the immigrants. If they are not accepted by the society, if they are told that they are alien, that they're not wanted, if they're victims of racism and xenophobia growing up, if they can't get the jobs, if they're stuck out in the goddamn Neuf-Trois here in Paris.
The northern suburbs.
The northern suburbs, and any time they say their name is Mohammed, they can't get a job. These are the kinds of issues that create tremendous resentment and a huge division in society.
All right, another precinct that's been heard from this week after a visit from his Austrian counterpart, the Interior Minister of Italy.
Noi siamo ottimisti, l'aria in Europa sta cambiando.
We are optimistic. The mood has changed in Europe.
Siamo estremamente fiduciosi nella presidenza austriaca.
We have trust in the Austrian EU presidency.
Confidiamo nel buon senso dei
We
colleghi
trust in the
europei.
good sense of our European partners,
auf den gesunden Menschenverstand der europäischen Kollegen.
especially because we wouldn't want to renegotiate our contribution to the EU.
Wouldn't want to renegotiate our contribution to the EU. That sounds a little like a threat, Vivian.
I would
Walt.
say it sounds like more than a threat, kind of blackmail, I
Is
would
the
say.
EU coming undone?
I wouldn't say it's quite at that point, but you know, yes, as we said, there is this alliance that's begun in a kind of Central Eastern European alliance, which we've seen before. I mean, we've seen it over major international issues before. But it appears to be a lot more serious now, particularly with the influence of Orban, who, you know, seems to have like a kind of regional influence now. But you know, the one thing I actually did want to just jump in quickly, for so long we've been talking about the greying of Europe and the fact that there's like this big crisis that the population isn't growing enough, particularly in countries like Italy. And this enormous influx of migrants actually presents both crisis and opportunity, as you were saying, that, you know, in Germany, for sure.
If I may, I think it is too you know, schematic to say that, you know, it is happening in the eastern part of Europe, and what we really see is a general tendency, and that's why it's not what you're saying. I mean, there is a huge, I would say, rebellion happening in Europe and in the West in general against, you know, open borders as a way of life. People want a home. And what is happening with Brexit, what has happened in the Netherlands, what is happening with France, because we had nevertheless Marine Le Pen at the second tour of the election, it's not nothing at all. We had Austria, we had Poland, we had Hungary, we have Italy is an earthquake for Europe. Italy is one of the founding states of Europe.
Treaty of Rome.
It's enormous. So the fact that it's happening that way, we have to pay attention. We cannot just say it's racist and xenophobe.
And just very briefly before we move on
Yes.
about this, because I just want to remind our viewers, there's an EU summit planned for next week. The initial remit was this Franco-German compromise on Eurozone reform, which is a big deal. Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel's joint cabinet meeting at Meseberg Castle, north of Berlin on Tuesday, completely overshadowed, though, by Merkel's open row with her own interior minister. Horst Seehofer of the Bavarian conservative sister party, the CSU, who's put off a showdown until after that summit, a summit which, by the way, is going to follow an informal summit this Sunday on migration. He's putting off his showdown with Merkel, well, sort of.
Aber es geht nicht 14 Tage.
This is not about 14 days. This is about a fundamental disagreement, namely that we want a national solution if a European solution does not materialize. And the CDU, or at least its leadership, does not want that national solution. That's the difference that we have, not 14 days.
Nicht die 14 Tage.
I asked Vivian Walt if the EU is coming undone. Is Germany coming undone?
Oh, you know, Pascal Bruckner, the French writer, a few weeks ago, he told me good enemies create friends. You know, real enemies create friends. I think that's happening with France and Germany right now. We are grasping now that we have enemies, not only Trump, but also in Italy, maybe also in Austria, and you know, maybe even within Germany in the Bavarian Party with this Seehofer, and I think. Merkel and Macron look closer than they ever did, and that was not expected. They have many differences on policies, and they have, but they need each other now more than ever, and that is a chance for both of them.
You sound like you're saying that Merkel is going to weather this storm.
Of course. I mean, she has still a huge majority for her policies in the parliament. She can govern with the Greens if she wants. You know, I don't think there is any danger of really Merkel being undone. There is a danger of the CSU becoming a national party, but in Germany maybe. But that can't, that won't. That doesn't necessarily make Merkel quit her position.
All right, we'll get the beginning of an answer next week as we cover that EU summit. Before that, they're voting in Turkey Sunday, and even though the incumbents jailed opposition leaders and journalists, fired judges and civil servants, even though Recep Tayyip Erdogan's enjoyed the lion's share of campaign coverage, the vote is still close. There he is inaugurating a new airport in Istanbul. He's announced he's going to lift the state of emergency. Can he win in the first round? Can his AK party get an outright majority in parliament? Has Erdogan still got it?
Every vote you cast for the People's Alliance on June 24th will be the final nail in the coffin of the old system in Turkey that keeps producing military coups and crises. On June 24th, every vote cast for the AKP party will guarantee our future.
Christopher Dickey? It's kind of interesting because people are saying, oh yeah, Turkey's become a dictatorship, yet the vote is not a done deal.
Well, we don't know really yet whether it's a done deal or not. Let's see how it plays out on Sunday. You know, you can have what's called an illiberal democracy that's very much like a dictatorship. You can see it in a place like Turkey, or you can see it in a place like, for instance, Nicaragua, which nobody's talking about, where Daniel Ortega keeps getting rid of all the laws that would keep him from ruling for life. That's exactly what Erdogan is doing. Turkey is a much more important country, but that's the game that Erdogan is playing. If you have enough of a majority, if you have a committed base, and if you do some policies that really do benefit a lot of people, you can do that. And I think that's what he's doing. It will be interesting, though. It's conceivable that he would lose these elections, so at least it's a horse race.
Then it could be he wins, you know, the presidency still. I mean, we don't know, and he loses the parliamentary election,
Right.
which is one of the scenarios. I think what is obvious is that Turkey has turned into an authoritarian state, maybe not a total dictatorship. They are still, you know, opponents. I mean, many of them are in jail. Lots of, you know, of papers which used to be, you know, very dynamic and vibrant have been closed or have been threatened. Journalists in prison as well. So many elements of control, and still, you know, this idea that maybe this guy who is rising, you know, from the Republican secularist party, and another guy who is from a new party have, you know, struck an alliance to go to the parliamentary election, and I think it hadn't happened in quite a few years that all opposition party were sort of uniting to go against Erdogan. So apparently there was a few local meetings of Erdogan's people in the provinces saying it's not done yet. It's not done yet.
And it's a physics teacher by training who's rattling the form. The center-left's Muharrem Ince of the CHP. as a physics teacher, but anything but boring on the campaign trail.
After 16 years, you cannot name one person he's friends with. Erdogan is now a tired man. He is an unexcited man. He is looking down on people. He is arrogant.
Muhammed Ince, a brawler himself, and that seems to have caught a little bit Erdogan off guard.
No, and I think that's why we shouldn't call Turkey a dictatorship. You know, it is a sort of democracy. We're making a big mistake here if we're saying this is a dictatorship. Dictatorships don't even, not in Nicaragua even. You know, China is a dictatorship that never voted before. You know, we're making a big mistake towards the African and outside Asia world if we call this Turkey a dictatorship.
Vivian Walt?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, North Korea is a dictatorship led by a man.
Well, I think there's a whole scale of these things.
Exactly.
I mean, you do have elections. You have a candidate who's running from prison.
Not to overplay this analogy, but Adolf Hitler was elected.
Yes.
I mean, so we wouldn't call that a dictatorship because he was elected, right, Georg?
Yes, but
not yes, but
no. But this comparison doesn't hold. I mean, it wasn't when he was in the moment when he was elected and became Chancellor of Germany. You couldn't say at that moment it was a dictatorship.
That's right.
I mean, I think
It became one when he changed the constitution and so forth.
That's the point.
Yes,
that's just the point.
But elections are going on in Turkey, and we are not grasping of what are people's notion of democracy in the world. Africans and Asians have different notions of democracy than we Europeans.
The problem is
presidential elections are one of the major things.
I'm not sure
but at the same time, you have about half of the population of Turkey who they think of themselves as part of the Western world. I mean, it's a divided society. And if you talk to many of my friends, who are journalists and living in the European part of Turkey, they would totally disagree with you. So I think it's a complicated issue. You cannot say it's a democracy.
Who showed up during the campaign with Erdogan, and I think they're good Democrats. I mean, they wouldn't say it was a big scandal in Germany. Özil and Gündogan were two of our best football players.
Speaking of football, Turkey's not at the World Cup, but neighboring Iran can hold its head high after a brave performance in a 1-0 loss to Spain Wednesday. That still leaves the door open to the knockout phase. Iran, whose fans have traveled north of the Russian border for the tournament, and they have women doing what they can't yet do back home, go to stadiums on match day.
It's fantastic. I never have this experience, and it was the first time I was in a stadium. I can't compare this with any time.
Vivian Walt, your reaction?
It's fabulous. Not just going to stadiums, but going to stadiums with your hair loose. So, yeah.
And face painted.
Yeah, face painted. It's great. I mean, the World Cup's always fascinating for all these reasons that have nothing to do with the game itself, and this is just one element of it.
Laure Mandeville, your thoughts on this World Cup, where the sporting results show, I don't know if we can extrapolate some great sociological lesson from them, but you have all these tiny nations, like today Costa Rica almost drew against Brazil, yesterday Croatia beat Argentina. The list is long of giant killers in this tournament. What does it say about our world today?
I don't know. It's quite interesting, actually, to see that small and nations and unexpected nations at some point, rise to beat giant of football. And I think it's interesting because I guess, for these nations, because football is always important for soccer for all nations, politically and nationally, for the national spirit. But maybe for small nations, they put so much into it that when they have the chance, they rise to the occasions. Or maybe we can fantasize and say that in this totally disorderly world of ours, football is reflecting, what is happening in the rest, of the world.
Losing earlier against Nigeria, but Georg Blume, Iceland, population 300,000, drawing with Argentina, including a penalty saved on Leo Messi.
It's pleasant.
Yeah, but I've been a few times to Iceland. They're such a great people, and they hold together. And that's what makes a team strong is not necessarily the best player.
I think
I was a football coach for many years and for the youth, and I always played against stronger teams, and sometimes we won.
But I mean, that's the thing about these small nation teams is that there's a kind of unity. It's more like a kind of football team from one town, or where they can really kind of build a kind of spirit in a way that you can't. And I mean, don't forget the US got knocked out into the qualifiers by Trinidad and Tobago, with probably like 1 million people in that country. So
well,
and then when you're
but
not
there's a real crisis in Germany, of course. I mean, after the loss against Mexico,
that'll be forgotten after you play Sweden, right?
Yes. Well, we're not so sure yet.
When France squeaked past Peru 1-0 in its second match on Thursday, the players themselves admitted it felt like an away match or a home match for the South Americans, depending on how you look at it. For their first World Cup since 1982, thousands of Peruvians making the trip to Russia, trekking over to Yekaterinburg, the easternmost city of this tournament. 1 week ago, Christopher Dickey was saying he's not a big football fan. When you see images like the Peruvians putting so much into it,
you think that makes me a fan?
Are you converted?
I don't know, François. I mean, I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, oh gosh, I wish I was one of those people. What, are you crazy? Of course not.
Yekaterinburg.
I mean, I don't. I think.
No, but a week ago we're talking about Russia, white elephant stadiums.
Well, this has been great for Putin. I mean, it's been fantastic for Putin. Speaking of authoritarians, he gets elected too. Should we just call him an authoritarian Democrat? It's been great for Putin. Everybody's forgotten about it. Everybody, Crimea, where's that? Ukraine, you start a war in Ukraine, it's still going on, 10,000 people dead. Oh no, football, let's let that take a priority. No, I think all that still applies.
Until this past midnight, Parisians could boast that theirs was the only city in the world to enjoy an electric car sharing service. Now, though, authorities have pulled the plug on a scheme bogged down by finger-pointing between mayors of the capital area and private contractor Bolloré, which wants reimbursement for a claimed €233 million deficit. Users, well, they've got mixed feelings.
I don't know what I'm going to do. It's a pity. Maybe something else should replace it. I don't know.
Yeah, others were... some say they're going to miss it. Others complaining. Vivian Walt?
I'm not going to miss it in the least. I did try it for a couple of months and then gave it up. It was impossible to find an Autolib wherever I was, and impossible to find a parking spot on the other side, and very complicated and somewhat expensive. I mean, I think much, much worse for Paris is the fact that their bike sharing program, Velib, which was also like an pioneer globally, is just completely in tatters. So that seems much more of a problem.
Well, they say they're fixing it, the system. It's always a question of, are you too much ahead of your time sometimes when you introduce these schemes?
Could be, actually, but I don't have much, experience. I take the subways.
I think it's a very French problem. You had the courage to do it. You did a revolutionary project, and then you have some problems in managing it. With a socialist mayor and
so we're better at launching stuff than at managing it.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem with Velib was they had a good working system, and they threw it out the window.
They had an excellent system.
I mean, those are old Velibs. They all worked fine, and there were plenty of places to take them and put them. Not so anymore.
Take heart, Christopher Dickey. The alternative is already here. A California-based company called Lime introducing electric scooters to several arrondissements of the capital. Will we see you on one of these soon?
Not really. I prefer
the problem with those is that they ride them on the sidewalk, and they can go like 20 miles.
They're not allowed on the sidewalk.
Oh, no, theoretically they're not allowed.
They go up to 24 kilometers an hour.
They go 24 kilometers an hour. You get hit by one of those things, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt like hell.
Well, I get around Paris on a kick scooter without the electric benefits, and more and more people do. I mean, it's a fantastic way to get around
But more and more people are on those electric devices that ride on the sidewalks, and they're very, very dangerous. And they also dangerous to them because they don't wear helmets, and dangerous to pedestrians because they'll run over you.
But Paris has become an incredible biking city. I lived here 30 years ago. You couldn't dare to hit the road with a bicycle. And today you have these bicycle lines everywhere and special, it's fantastic, you know, how the city is changing.
All right, we're going to leave on that upbeat note. Georg Blume, I want to thank you. Laure Mondeville, Vivian Walt, Christopher Dickey. Thank you for joining us here in The World this week.